Sometimes we do word associations. One word association I think, sadly, that has been lost on us is simply Christianity and ambition. You see, these two parables that have been put before us, Jesus is trying to stir your ambitions. I think John Stott is right. The Christian church, certainly at least the circles I kind of interact with, the world we swim in, so to speak, though that idea of ambition is kind of lost. You would say what seems more Christian is the word modest. Does that seem more like an association you might play? Christianity, modest. Car salesman, ambitious. That worked, right? So Jesus is saying it should be Christianity, ambitious. The problem I think we've had is we've seen Christianity tied to ambition so poorly that we assume they're disconnected. So really, these parables, I'll be very frank, I find over and over and over again with Christians, do not inspire, do not hit home, they're not something that we gravitate to. My hope is this morning, looking at these parables rightly, there are places where we're going to have to take out the garbage. There are other places where I believe these parables should reshape our thinking. And I don't say that lightly. You know, if you know me, I'm not one to think that every passage, some passages we think very clearly. These passages, this idea of the mustard seed has been taken out of proportion, has been misused for so long, I don't think we gravitate to it. Therefore, we've lost this sense of Christian ambition. So I believe that's exactly what is transpiring here. That we have a set of ambitious parables, as we'll talk through, that lay out an ambitious vision. So therefore, if we're going to participate in that vision, we end up with what I would call a holy ambition. So the parables, the vision, and then the holy ambition is the way we'll walk through it. To get us started with these parables is a little stunt that the Washington Post pulled. There's Joshua Bell, if I said his name correctly. Joshua Bell is a world-renowned violinist. He has Grammy Awards to his name. He has done international concerts, and he was going to play a concert in D.C. Minimum ticket price to get in to hear him play was $200. You weren't going to get in the room short of $200. When I heard that, at first I thought, man, that's a lot for a violin. I mean, I've heard Devil Come Down to Georgia, you know? I mean, that's neat. His violin alone, $3.5 million. So this man is on another level maybe than the fiddle I heard on a weird cruise ship one time. So this guy, $3.5 million, $200 a ticket. The Washington Post comes to him and they said, we want you to do something. We want you to take your violin and your setup, go sit down in the subway terminal and throw your case open. Let's see how much you make. So he was taking the music he was going to play for the concert into the subway terminal. They said very few people noticed. If I heard correctly, he made less than $200 total. Because a guy in a ball cap, some jeans, playing a violin in the subway, didn't meet their expectation, so they ignored what they heard. You take the God of the universe in a ball cap and some jeans, and he shows up. He's talking about the kingdom and doing parables, but it doesn't meet their expectations, so they ignore everything they hear. They're looking at him, say, the kingdom of heaven that he's introducing. I mean, they're looking at the 12 guys with him that have been fishermen and tax collectors. They're like, that doesn't seem like a kingdom. And you, sir, are definitely not a king. So Jesus starts outlining, yes, this doesn't meet your expectations, nor would his kingdom ultimately meet their expectations. So he starts one parable after another that says, the kingdom of heaven is like. He's wanting to reshape expectations. So if we're going to have our expectations reshaped, we need to hear these parables well. So the first one, they'll go kind of quick. I think we're very familiar. The first one is the mustard seed. The mustard seed grows into a tree. Tiniest garden plant. Some of you may have mustard plants. This is a different variety. The seed size is very the same. So if you've seen a little round mustard seed somewhere, very similar seed size. For the plants, the garden plants that they grew, the seed was the smallest of those garden plants. It's not the smallest seed on planet Earth. That wasn't the point. Smallest garden plant that they typically grew, it was metaphorical for something small. So they take that plant, they have a variety of mustard plant that is an annual. So it grows and dies in one season. In a single season, you can see pictures online, maybe from the Middle East, this particular variety, maybe not right now, but at some point you can find a picture online. The seed grows up, and we would think of it as like a giant bush. It almost has overhanging branches, but it looks like a giant bush. It's maybe 10 feet tall. It would certainly grow big enough for birds to nest in. That level of growth, even for this variety, however, is still unique. That amount of growth from the tiny little plant, from the tiny little seed, rather, is unique. Let me put it in North Carolina ease. Kudzu? Do you know kudzu? You'll tell somebody who's not from here, man, you better cut that stuff back. It'll take over your whole backyard in the summer. What do they think? They think you're ridiculous. Just like I did when I moved here and discovered kudzu. Somebody said, "Oh man, we gotta really scale that back. It will eat up our parking lot." I was like, what does that even mean? It will eat your parking lot. Here, in like a few months, you're going to see our back parking lot, a huge portion of it covered with kudzu. People are having to drive around the kudzu. They don't want it to eat their car. So we understand the idea that you could start with something that seems insignificant, and in less than a year's time, this plant grows beyond your wildest dreams. He's saying, the kingdom of heaven, at that moment, Jesus is in a little boat right at the edge of the shore he's using for a stage, talking to some people in a rural town in Israel along the lake. And he says something incredible. This kingdom is going to be so big, the birds will nest in it. Here's why that's incredible. They know their Old Testament. Ezekiel 17 and Daniel 4 both have metaphors. In Ezekiel 17, it's a parable about a little sprig that gets planted, that grows up so big, the birds of the heavens nest in it. Daniel brings out the exact same idea. Daniel chapter 4, verse 20. He's talking about a tree that gets planted. Listen to this. He says in 20 and following, this tree in whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is you, O king. He goes on, your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven, and your dominion to the end of the earth. So this is a little different parable. The reason Jesus says it's a mustard seed that goes in the ground and becomes a tree is not because Jesus could not discern between a large bush and a tree. It's because he's playing on this Old Testament idea, and he's bringing that meaning in. He says the kingdom he's starting, humble beginnings along a lake. It will one day graft in people from every nation under the sun, and it will be where they find their provision for life. Is that your expectation of the kingdom work. Do you expect to go to church and it be about like it's always been? Do you see the kingdom being something that you anticipate, that you have this vision for? Oh, this thing's going to grow. Next, Jesus says it's going to have incredible transformation. I grew up around sourdough bread being made. If you ever had a family member who made a lot of sourdough bread or any sourdough bread, they had almost like a little pet, because you got to feed it every now and then. A little pet that's a starter. Some of you, I got a chuckle out of 3 people. The rest of you have never tasted good bread. So they have a starter that you got to keep the starter all the time for sourdough. It's what you're going to take a little bit out of it and put it in the bowl with all the other flour and some ingredients, and it will work through, because the yeast in the starter, which is essentially just fermented flour, is going to transform the rest of the flour. It's what you're going to make the dough out of. This is the same thing with leaven. Leaven is not yeast in and of itself. Leaven literally was, they would make dough, they would take a little pinch of the dough and save it for the next batch, because it was the thing that was going to interact with the flour in the next batch. That was leaven. This little starter. Here, Jesus gives ridiculous proportions. He says 3 measures. 3 measures equals 8.5 gallons. If my math serves, that's 50 pounds of flour. He says you're going to take a little bit of leaven and you put it with the flour. You can have 50 pounds of flour, but the active ingredient in the leaven will transform every bit of the flour. Do you see the kingdom of God that way? Is that your expectation? Because there's a couple attributes to it. You know what you can't do once you've activated all that flour is get it back to flour. You can't do it. The more flour you put into it, it's just going to transform as well. It's irreversible transformation. It's irreversible transformation, and it's complete transformation. Every bit of the flour gets grafted in. Every bit of the flour. Let me be real frank, believer. Is that how you think about your own life even? That every bit of life is going to get touched by this thing in an irreversible way? But here, Jesus is using that on a grand scale. He says, do we expect transformation to happen in the lives of people around us to such a degree that it makes a kingdom? He's wanting to change expectations. So here, the first piece is very simple. He gives this grand vision. Once you put in that the birds in the nest are people across the globe, and that they are all going to find provision in his kingdom, and that it's going to be incredibly transformative, is a pretty grand vision. Here's where Matthew's way of outlining this is so helpful, though. We don't stop there and run with it, which happens a lot. People stop there, they're like, yeah, man, we need to go get them. I'm not even sure what that means yet. We need to go get them. Here's where Jesus does something that's counterintuitive. If you go back to the passage, he tells these 2 parables, grand vision. Then it says, in verse 34, all these things Jesus said to the crowd in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophets. Then he actually quotes from Psalm 78, verses 2 and 3. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundation of the world. Here's what's kind of fascinating about that little addendum right at the end of these parables. If I told you we need to motivate a crowd full of people along the lake, would you tell them confusing, cute stories one after another? Would that be how you would do it? I've had some relatives come along and they'll talk about stories from their past, and I have one in particular that it's a rabbit trail, but they're such a good storyteller, you feel like it's going to come back around. Then it goes here, then it goes to a new rabbit trail. Then it goes to a new one. You ever met somebody like that? Just keeps going. This is one little parable that doesn't seem to land. Then he goes to the next one, doesn't seem to land. We know this because his disciples come to him and they say, Jesus, you got to explain these little weird stories to us. Like, what's up with the wheat and the tares? That made no sense. So Jesus lays out a grand vision of what the kingdom of heaven is like. But then he seems to be bottlenecked by this passage from Psalms. That he's got to do it. He's got to initiate this grand vision in weird little stories. Hopefully, we get a glimpse of the further expectation. The stories in and of themselves don't produce the transformation. He is dependent upon, if I follow the way Scripture has laid it out, the Father, by the work of the Holy Spirit, will produce the transformation. Real, actual transformation. Let me try to put it in our context, because I think we need this piece of it. So it's not just, here's the end goal, now go do it. It's, here's the end goal, now follow God's method to get there. Here's what happens in churches. I've heard the argument a couple times. There are some churches that want to bring in as many people as possible. To be frank, is a great goal. So we would have a very similar goal. We want to see as many people come into the kingdom of heaven as possible. The difference is how you get there. Right? So the advice that was given to me is, Mitch, you need to stop kind of doing it the way you're doing it. There are methods that work. You need to pick up one of these methods and run with it. And the logic was, look at our church. It's booming because we followed the method. You can't deny it works. Look at all these people coming. Well, that same logic would work for a fight in the parking lot. Look at all these people coming. Everybody wants to see it. What we're really trying to accomplish is not just people coming. We hope and long for actual transformation. That's really what we want, is for God to transform lives, one life at a time. So although it's unpopular, largely, here's what we're doing, is we're going to people and we're saying, I've been a sinner. My world's been jacked up, and I know you're a sinner and your world is messed up. You need to turn away from those things. They're not actually ever going to produce what you hope they'll produce. You need to turn away from those things. But if you will turn to Christ first, He will forgive you. He will unload all that baggage. He will forgive you, but then you're going to lose your life. You're going to set aside your desires, your dreams, your hopes, and you're going to adopt His. But what you'll find is you gain more life than you ever had. The problem is, the moment you started telling them they're a sinner, right? They don't want to hear it after that. That message, that gospel message, whether somebody wants to hear it or not, is the one God uses to transform lives. So we're going to keep preaching that message. So he's saying the expectation is that you should have a grand vision that you're going to carry out by God's method. So, that's the idea from the parables. In some sense, we would stop now. The reason we can't stop now is because you're familiar with these parables. The mustard seed that grows so big, birds can live in it. I would venture this is not the first time you've heard it. If it is, you could play on your phone from here on out in the service. But if it's not, if that idea is something you've gone over before, there are two bad interpretations that land you consistently in the wrong spot. The first one is the interpretation I suspect you have viewed as the most faithful at some point in time. The interpretation is simply this: that this works like a rearview mirror. We can look back and see what God has done. It's usually presented as a defense of the faith. Here's how it goes. See if this makes sense. The gospel is something Jesus produced as a little mustard seed in Israel. It has now spread, so there are churches across the globe. We can see that. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Man, if you look back and see how far the gospel has spread, Jesus' words were prophetic. On one level, that is all true. The gospel did spread from one man as a carpenter in Israel across the globe. It's absolutely true and absolutely not the point. How do I know that's not the point? Because we want to be good students of the Bible. He's not saying, here's a parable, and then we say, how does this apply to us? What should we ask first? How did this apply to them? How did it apply to them? If you see how it applied to them, here's what you're going to recognize. He's not saying, here's a rearview mirror. One day you're going to be able to look back. He's saying, here's a windshield. I want you to look out. This is a grand vision. And it's literally to them. When I say them, it's not just hyperbole. Here's what he says. He put another parable before them, saying, verse 33, he told them another parable. So how did this speak to those people? Jesus is attempting to captivate their imagination. To say, yes, this is humble beginnings. But when God works through it, the transformative power is unstoppable. Every bit of flour will be consumed, and it is going to grow until you see unimaginable results. Church, if I could encourage you any way, it's to adopt that thought process. That the gospel produces incredible transformation of unimaginable results. So Jesus is describing a vision of growth and transformation the size of a windshield. So if all we take away is a rearview mirror's worth, we're missing it. The second error is much worse, and it's very prevalent. This is consistent. I've had to rein this part in throughout the week. When I said we need to take out the trash, what I mean is be real frank. The best phrase I could come up with is hot, wet garbage. I was trying to think what disgusts you without really saying something that would make you not want to go to lunch after this. All right, so it's just hot, wet garbage. Not to us. Not to us. I think it's appealing to us. I think to Jesus, it is hot, wet garbage. It's the way this parable is most often used. So, the abuse is rampant. There are specific people, well-known people, who use it. Here's the deal, though. I can't give you names because there are also specific lesser-known people in your county that use it. I want you to be able to spot it more than just throw out a couple individuals. We need to throw out the actual garbage. Here's the way it's used. The thought initially is they accurately describe what Jesus is doing. That from humble beginnings, God will do transformative, incredible things. They accurately get that piece. They're putting themselves in the spot of the original hearers, the them. They get that, what Jesus is trying to do. But then how they apply it to us is the problem. They don't apply the grand vision to the kingdom of heaven. They apply the grand vision to your kingdom. It goes something like this. God will take your mustard seed and turn it into wealth. God will take your small beginnings and build that business you've always dreamt of. God will take your free moments out of each day and help you write that book you've thought about for years. God will take a little bit, the little bit you can save, and He will build that into the vacation home of your dreams. It usually goes a little more subtle. God may have given you a seed idea, or seed money, or a seed opportunity, and He wants it to grow. He's going to unleash your potential. Do you see why it's so bad? If God is growing your kingdom, that means you're Jesus. Because the kingdom God is actually growing is the one ruled and reigned by Christ. So if you got a promise somewhere along the way that your seed was going to grow into something incredible and God was going to make it happen, then He is taking the kingdom of Christ and making it your kingdom. And you just became your own savior. When people start replacing Jesus with their own wants and desires, that's despicable. So it is not your kingdom that's going to be built. The problem is, we know that's wrong and despicable, so we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Jesus is still trying to unfold for you an incredible vision of the kingdom of heaven. He's wanting you to be on board with God's kingdom, growing and transforming. Wanting you to have a role in something that's much bigger than yourself. The Harvard Business Review talked about middle essence. We all know adolescence. They're playing on it. Middle essence. They said because people get to the middle of life and it kind of feels like the middle of adolescence. They're bored. They feel like they've got a lot more potential, but they're not being allowed to grow. They realize they're stuck at a management level, they'll never be at the executive level. They realize that they thought the wealth would come in more than it ever has, right on down the list. So I think Jesus believes you are intended for much more. But it is a part of building His kingdom. Sometimes it's hard to maybe get our minds around without an example. It's hard for me to get my mind around without an example. Thankfully, God landed an example in my office. So, as a pastor, you feel an overwhelming duty to be polite and nice. That's just true. If you've met a mean pastor, I don't know how he's getting away with it. I just don't know. So, overwhelming duty to be polite and nice. Two gentlemen show up at the church, stop by my office. They said, "Can we have a minute of your time?" Ooh, polite and nice. Polite and nice. Yeah, I would love that. Come on in. So we sit down together, and there was a guy white American guy, and then a guy from India. I thought at the time, the way he introduced himself. Come to find out, he's from Mongolia. They walk in. The American guy is your typical kind of salesman type. He's going to listen to this, and he's going to be so mad. It's true, brother. And so, typical salesman type, he's selling, we would love for your church to support our ministry. That's what he's selling. He remembered me from somewhere, and I was going, I really don't think we know each other, but he knew my name. So he either looked him up on the website and faked it, or we've met which is more like we met and I'd forgotten. So he says, can we have a minute of your time? What got really fascinating is he was less concerned for our church to support their ministry and more truly wanting this man from Mongolia to be an inspiration to churches here. I thought, okay, I'll listen. The man from Mongolia is a dentist, Dr. Amar. Dr. Amar went and got his PhD in Japan because they have a good dental school. Comes back to Mongolia. Mongolia did not have a dental school. So he comes back as a dentist, but he partners with the university in Mongolia. So Mongolia, a nation of 3.4 million, does not have a dental school at all in the nation. So within the past 20 years, Dr. Amar founded a dental school. And started, now they've had, if I remember correctly, 500 dentists or other practitioners in the dental field go out from the school. He said, now every kid in Mongolia gets a toothbrush. He went on from that, though. They also did not have a medical school. So through his international contacts, he starts a medical school. Him and a doctor found the first medical university hospital in Mongolia. Then he's over in the U.S., and he's a Christian. He's over in the U.S., and he wants to attend a series of seminars on how to share the gospel. He said he got to the final seminar. And when he's sitting in my office, I could tell he's kind of excited to get to his spot. And he says, you know what the final seminar was about? No, sir, I have no idea. He said, goal setting. I thought, oh, that sounds awful. He says, goal setting, that's what it's about. Here's what he meant. He said, I came to realize I could be a part of something much bigger. He has founded 2 medical schools in this country. How much bigger do you want? He says, I could be a part of what God would want to do in Mongolia. He said, when I saw that I could be a part of what God would do in our country, he said, okay, what would God do? The method, right? He says, it's real simple. He says, I think God would want us to give people a Bible and to share the gospel. So I'm still waiting for, okay, that's neat. I think those are great things. That's certainly the method. That's it. You got it. He says, so what I decided to do was I wanted to go back and do it for everybody. Now he had my attention. 3.4 million people, and you're going to give them all a Bible and tell all of them about the gospel. He said, yeah. And he said, we're only 2.5% Christian. But he said, I thought if I could go back and encourage those other Christians that I know that live in Mongolia, and we could start going to door, we could hand them all a Bible in their language. He said, I know I can get that funded. And we could share the gospel with them. So I'm very practical. I said, how many people is that again? And he said, well, it's 3.4 million, but that boils down to a little over 900,000 households. And he said, as of about a week ago, we've gone to 119,000 of them. So we're getting close. He got it. There is an ambitious fire lit under him. For him to say, I think we can get the gospel presented at every home in Mongolia, and I'm going to have everybody a Bible in their language. Only happens if you believe it will transform the nation. And this is the type of growth God's been talking about. I think the beauty for us as a church, as he's talking, one number stuck with me. 2.5% Christian. I wasn't quick enough to run the math without my iPhone. 3.4 million at 2%, 2.5% Christian, breaks out to, you'll have to look at your iPhone too. Good. So, the 2.5% was what stuck with me though. Do you know another place that's 2.5% Christian? Vermont. And I went, you got to be kidding me. What could God do through our church if we were just convinced people there need to hear the gospel and have a Bible they can read? What might he do? If we just backed it up slightly, are you convinced he would transform our county? Gaston County? Is that idea that he would transform our county something you've given up on somewhere along the way? Or would you grab hold of Dr. Amar's thought? Maybe you could be a part of something bigger than your job. You could be a part of building the kingdom of heaven. That's the mustard seed. It should be a windshield's worth of vision. Everywhere you look, you think, man, this is a big idea. If all we've ever gotten out of it is that rearview mirror, man, look how far the church has come. We've missed it. And to quote John Stott, when it comes to the idea of the kingdom of heaven, how dare you act modestly? This is an incredible, powerful thing. But I also know some of us have thought modestly about its ability to affect your life. A little leaven will leaven your whole life. Do you even want God to transform you? My hope and prayer is that you would say, I want his method and his dreams for me. Would you please stand as we sing this final song together?